the head of the Munich Security Conference, cried on stage and left.
Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
One lesson that all of us will already have is that Europe is basically a bunch of irrelevant rats.
I think what's most important here, given your perspective of being inside of Russia, I know you've been having conversations with people about what the mood is under Trump 2.0, but I wanted to play you something first about BRICS in particular, and the idea that a lot of Trump's people, even Trump himself before he came into office, has floated. Now you have top aide Keith Kellogg saying that one of the possible concessions that the U.S. will be asking of Russia is to break off relations with key BRICS partners.
What concessions will Putin have to make?
You know, to me, there's going to have to be things like territorial concessions as well. Okay, some of it is unrealistic to expect where you'd want to go to, but it's territorial. It's some territorial. It could be the engagement of refusing to use force, renouncement of the use of force into the future. From a political side, he's not going to downsize his military forces. Hopefully, get rid of. What we're going to try to do is basically force him into actions. What you want to do is force him to actions maybe he's uncomfortable with. What I mean by that is an example. Right now is what we're going to do is try to break this alliance that he currently has. He's got an alliance around North Korea that wasn't there before. He's got an alliance with Iran that wasn't there before. He's got an alliance with China that wasn't there before, meaning 4 years ago before.
I know you've been talking about this, the ultimate agenda here in terms of breaking up Russia from BRICS. What's your thoughts? Will it work? Will it be demanded? What do you think?
Danny, it's hard to start our conversation when the focus in the clip is an imbecile. But okay. I told other podcasts, wrote about it, that Kellogg is viewed here in Russia as diplomatically a relic of the Cold War. And dinners in the corridors, etc., as an imbecile. So he's not in charge of the negotiations. The negotiating team is Rubio, Waltz. This is a first contact. This is the beginning of an uphill battle. So all this blah, blah, blah all over the NATO stand sphere and beyond for the moment means absolutely nothing. And Lavrov made it very, he went straight to the point as usual. We want this to be the beginning of the reorientation of U.S.-Russia relations as a whole. So they have to start literally from scratch. So it's very, very complicated. And Ukraine is one of the items in the agenda. The most important item in the agenda is spheres of influence, essentially, because sooner or later, if Trump 2.0 is serious about a dialogue with Russia, dialogue, very important, diplomatically, according to Sergei Ryabkov, number 2 at the Foreign Ministry, respecting history, geography, and culture, then obviously we're going to reach to the point that is inextricably linked to the possibility of a new Yalta, which could be, it's not an accident, May 9th, here, commemoration of the 80th year of the Russian victory in the Great Patriotic War, where Xi Jinping will be in town, Putin will be the host, and Donald Trump may come as well. What better place? We can even have a plane from the Russian armed forces taking the 3 of them to Yalta in Crimea. Why not? Yalta 2.0 in Yalta. But until we get there, Saudi Arabia is the first meeting. Discuss INF treaty, discuss the war in Ukraine in certain amount of detail, discuss sanctions, discuss possible scenarios, prepare the terrain, of course, for a live meeting face-to-face between Trump and Putin, right? The fact that this is already happening in itself is beyond extraordinary, because nobody could imagine only a few months ago that this would be happening. And if we put it back to, let's say, end of October, beginning of November last year, this is something that would never have happened. A few days after the BRICS summit and before uh, the election in the US. So obviously there are a lot of, the Americans are masters, of course. There's a lot of spinning, literally spinning around, to quote the great dance metaphysician Kylie Minogue. So we hear from Hexat, we hear from Kellogg, and we hear from J.D. Vance, who drove people in Munich literally to tears, starting with himself. The head of the Munich Security Conference, who actually cried on stage and left because he had nothing to say. So one lesson that all of us, we already have is that Europe is basically a bunch of irrelevant rats. And I'm trying to be diplomatic here again. This was said by several members of the American delegation and directly by Vice President Vance. Of course, Vance in his speech never said that the behavior of the European rats is a mirror of the behavior of American elites and the American political system and American priorities all over the world. He just went straight to the back end, right? But anyway, to have a vice president of the United States come to the Munich Security Conference with all those self-important guys from Germany, Holland, Britain, Central Europe, etc., gathered together and just say, look, you are irrelevant geopolitically, militarily, and soon geoeconomically, unless you transfer the remaining of your industrial complex to the US. So you're free to pay up, and it's 5%, that's it. 2%, you're dead. It's 5% or nothing. And you're free to buy all the weapons that we produce. That's it. And maybe we'll tell you something of what transpires of the conversations between our delegations, Russia and the US, and later Trump and Putin face to face. But that's it, essentially. So no wonder, Danny and our audience, the Europeans were like, obviously, there was no reality. It was a mix of perplexity and fear, but the fear of hell, in fact. So they come up with this brilliant idea tomorrow, Tuesday, to have a conference of several European powers, plus the European Commission, to let's establish the European position vis-a-vis the new realities in Europe, etc. We can call it the Congress of the Losers, essentially. So this is what they're going to get, the Congress of the Losers, irrelevant losers, of course. But now things are, the perspective is quite, things are put in perspective now. And everything is clear. That Project Ukraine might have been an American-European idea. Now that it's floundering and you just cannot get away from it, who's going to pay the cost? Who's going to foot the bill? First of all, the Ukrainians who died in droves, and especially the Europeans who are going from now on to pay for everything. They want a peacekeeping force or European forces, NATO, no NATO, sub-NATO in Europe. Okay, do it and you pay. You want to buy American weapons? Okay, excellent. You want to decide the future of Ukraine? No, that's not for you. So that's it. And can you imagine the state of these people now, this remaining representatives of this coterie in Brussels and in different European capitals, when they look at the strategic defeat project of Russia coming to this? There you go. And then we have, apart from the clip that you played, we could also play the head of the Munich Security Conference collapsing on stage. We can play the batshit crazy Estonian chick saying that no Russians die in the war, which, once again, I have to remind all of you, especially all of you who are watching us in Europe. How do you explain the fact that 450 million European citizens and voters are represented as a whole in terms of their foreign policy by a semi-illiterate, imbecile, and thicker than a door knob. There is no explanation for that. Yes, in fact, there is. It's how the system in Brussels works, which not even Kafka could have imagined. It's not about meritocracy. It's about connections. It's about following the single agenda, which is predetermined by the European Commission, following American orders essentially, but also ruling elites across Europe. This is how it works. And then we have something like this as the head of the EU foreign policy. It's no wonder that Trump and his team, they look at this and say, why do we even need to talk to these people? They represent nothing. And they are basically, we order them to do whatever we want to do. Or we ignore them completely, which is going to be the new, let's say, state of things across Europe. What's going to happen to NATO is going to be quite interesting to watch, because this obviously will be discussed by the Russian-American delegations and later by Trump and Putin face to face, because we should never forget, once again, that everything that is happening now is a direct consequence of the non-response. It was not even a non-response response. It was a non-response by the Americans when the Russians sent those letters in December 2021 talking about, let's sit down and discuss indivisibility of security. Instead, the Democrats and people around them and their donors and this section of the American ruling class say, no, let's provoke Putin with a war in Donbas, which was what led to the SMO nearly 3 years ago. It's something that is still being discussed here in Moscow in detail. Was it inevitable? Yes. The consensus is yes. I had this conversation in Donbas this weekend. Was it too late? Everybody said too late. And everybody, I mean residents of Avdiivka who were shelled, invaded, and some of them taken hostage by the Ukrainians for years. So these are the people who have something to say about this war, not a bunch of politicians. You know, when you talk to them, then you see it, and it's consensual. Yes, it took too long. It should have been in 2014 or 2015, but at the same time, instinctively, they knew that Russia was not ready, and they also know that when the SMO started 3 years ago, there was a set of circumstances that made it inevitable for Putin to do what he ordered. By the way, at the Munich Security Conference, I'm sure many of you remember that Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference 3 years ago, he talked about Iran going nuclear again. That's a mega red line for Russia. The SVR had 3 different dates of the Ukrainian army with full NATO backing crossing inside Donbas and provoking a massacre. So, and one of these dates was very close to the date that SMO was ordered. And of course, the poison labs inside Ukraine, which at the time the Russians already had documented evidence provided, including Ukrainian scientists. So you have all these 3, obviously, you cannot escape it. How the war was conducted, why is it lasting so long, etc. That's another story. This will be a very complicated military discussion. The way the industrial military complex in Russia works, the way they make their decisions, their way of fighting, that's a completely different story. But now that we see the facts in front of us, which means Russia continues to advance. For instance, when I was on the road to Ugledar Sunday morning, yesterday morning, I was on the road to Ugledar, which was liberated, to give you an idea, all of you, only 4 months ago. And Ugledar from Donetsk is something like maybe half an hour away from Donetsk, 40 minutes. On the left side of the road going towards Ugledar, you could see the trenches under the snow now, and of course discontinued because these were the Russian trenches. Obviously now they don't need it anymore. And on the right side of the road, you have an immense set of unexploded mines, and they told me this would go all the way through the fields. And so you have to demine all this area. You need to start rebuilding everything. They took me to an absolutely outstanding place, a beautiful double monastery with a church and convents attached, St. Nicholas and St. Basil, outside of Ugledar. This compound, this religious compound, was shelled by the Ukrainians over and over again. They showed me the remains of the convent for nuns that was hit by 5 HIMARS in succession. What's the military purpose of hitting a convent full of nuns? So this is the reality of war that obviously you will never see discussed in the Munich Security Conference. So I was particularly pleased that I was there. It happened by accident. Instead, if I was in Europe, I would probably have gone to Munich. But instead, I was in Russia, so I went to Donbas. And on 2 dates, there were, pregnant with meaning, both of them. On Friday, I was in Luhansk. I didn't know, and then it occurred to me, wow, it was the day that Luhansk was liberated from the Nazis in 1943. So I was in one of the main parks and rebuilt, of course, after intense shelling for years, etc. Rebuilt a very nice park. And there is a beautiful statue that remained from the past, celebrating the victory against the Nazis in 1943. And there was a delegation. We were there in the morning. There was a delegation coming to pay their respects and put red roses in front of the monument. Luhansk liberated, and then Luhansk re-liberated decades later. And I was there. I happened to be in Avdiivka practically on the day that Avdiivka was liberated 1 year ago. Also by an accident. Amazing. And of course, my first visit was only a few days after the liberation. It was in March last year. In February, when I went there, they were advancing towards Avdiivka, and the commanders were saying, we're going to take it in a maximum of a few weeks. They took it in 10 days, in fact. And then when I came back 1 month later in March, it was the first few days of liberated Avdiivka, which was something that stays with you forever. Total devastation. This is the definition of an urban wasteland. It's hard to fathom. It's very hard to grasp. And there were still people living there. There were, at the time, there were like 50 to 60 people who had remained, who decided not to leave. Now, this weekend, they told me there are at least 300 to 400 already. And you see the first buildings that are being little by little rebuilt. They explained to me how it works. A company from different regions of Russia, they choose the buildings that they want to rebuild, and then you see a plaque in front with the targets when they plan to finish. So they're going to rebuild Avdiivka block by block, and it's a common effort from all over Russia. Beautiful thing to watch. There are shops already, which is incredible, but it's still a complete total devastation. It's mind-boggling. But the people who survived, and I talked to 2 absolutely extraordinary ladies in their 60s. One of them was a hostage for months, and another one, a kindergarten teacher, who was always trying to talk to the Ukrainians as well. So, and she expresses herself as a kindergarten teacher, so she's very good with people, very good also with grown-ups. And she was trying to, her interpretation of the war was something incredible. She was not apportioning blame to the Ukrainian side or the Russian side. It's her city. She told me how her husband went there because of the Avdiivka plant, which at the time of the Soviet Union had 40,000 people working in this plant. So this was a company town, essentially, you know, very working class, something that you see right away, you know. And she said, no, it was maybe an enormous misunderstanding. Of course, she didn't go into a geopolitical analysis of why the war happened, of course. But it was fascinating to see somebody who actually suffered her own city being destroyed, and it was destroyed by both sides. We have to be very, very factual about it. And the fact that the Ukrainians were there, they were treating the residents as hostages. This is inadmissible, of course. But still, she found a way to frame of that as a sort of misunderstanding of history. Can you imagine, Danny, one of these in Munich having a conversation with this woman? Impossible. No? Impossible. So these are the people who actually teach you matters of war and peace. You know, you don't even need to read Tolstoy for that. You talk to an average civilian in a war zone, and there's everything you need to know.